Okay, so again, if you hopefully everybody had a as good of an Easter as you can have, given the circumstances. Hope you're able to spend some time with your families and celebrate. Um, attend your digital church services. So that's how we spent our morning. And then we went to McDonald's, and that was the special meal for the day. Is the
Obviously, the best part to any Easter.
Well,
Nice.
actually, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna give McDonald's some props here. Their curbside pickup is great. You know how like it kind of sucks going through the drive-through and making sure you get your order right and some of that. I pull in, I go to a parking spot there, and I open up the app and I place my whole order on the app, and I can double check it, make sure all that stuff, and then I hit submit and I pay for it and everything. And then 3 minutes later, somebody walks out and hands it to me. It's great. So McDonald's is our new version of fine dining.
Truly fine indeed.
Actually, I thought the pancakes were pretty good. So I'm not going to knock them. All right. So let's pick up where we left off. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of a twist to make sure we talk about file I/O before we talk about inheritance. But if we go up here in our code, we would say that all this stuff we're doing up here, creating 6 rooms like this, and then creating some exits and adding exits, all this is pretty tedious, right? And this is something, if we were going to build anything bigger, then a dungeon like this would start getting pretty hectic for us. So we have some different approaches that we can use for trying to automate this. Remember at the very, very beginning of the class, we were using a book called Automate the Boring Stuff. So one thing we want to start thinking about is how do we wield a computer programming language to kind of do our bidding. And we also don't want to lock ourselves into a single tool. So what we're doing right now is we're effectively building a game, right? And the important parts of this game, or the important parts of any game or any really user application, is
especially the roguelikes.
Right, exactly. That's a type of game for those of you who are familiar with the phrase. But the most important is how the user interacts with the game and how that whole world works, killing rats and all that jazz. So with that in mind, our code, we'd like to be able to focus on that aspect of it and then be able to kind of create our environments maybe somewhere else and get it somehow imported into our code. So that's what we're going to spend the next couple of classes talking about, is this idea of data representation. And let's see, I kind of recall we talked about it a little bit. So we talked about data representation languages. And we talked about some of the history of that a little bit, where we have, like if you go to Excel and you export, you can export in comma separated values. You can export, if you look at a web page, it's formatted in HTML behind the scenes. And then what happens? Your web browser translates that crazy looking text that, humans, programming-ish types could look at HTML and figure out what it's doing, but it's very much an organized language that somebody else has to translate in order to make it look pretty for a normal person to look at it and say, okay, this is meaningful to me just from an information perspective, not necessarily from a representation perspective. We don't care at the end of the day how our websites were actually represented behind the scenes, as long as they work. All right. But we can appreciate that they were represented in some sort of interesting way behind the scenes. Now, having said that, a computer programmer can say, you know what, sometimes I want to have data that's an input into my program. Or maybe my program processes some data and then translates it into a user interface. I need to be able to either write a tool to allow you to create that representation, which is what we're going to do. We're going to actually create separate tools here. And then I need to have the ability to read that representation in. Now, what we need to think about first is how would we represent our data? So if we're thinking about representing a room, what does a room look like? Well, we go back to our code here. And when we created rooms, we said a room had a title. It had a, then a description, right? That's what a room had in it. So we could do something like, for a room, we can say, have the title maybe separated by a colon, and then maybe the description. All right, so we can say that that's a room. Now I'm going to throw one more thing in here for a room. I'm going to say a room also has an ID. Because we're going to have to start thinking about these rooms in terms of their ID. So we can think of this as a room ID R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, R6. We can pretend those are the IDs. If you want to keep it strictly numeric, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Doesn't matter, but we have to have a way of uniquely talking about a room. All right, so if I'm going to create a text document, so I'm actually going to go ahead and let's start doing that. So we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to save this guy, and we're going to save it as a text file, and we're going to call this guy, let's call it the map.txt. Okay, this is going to be our text file for our map. All right, so now for right now, I'm just going to put in some stuff into that, that file. All right, so now we're gonna go back into here. And just for the moment, I'm gonna create a new Python program. Maybe let's call this guy filetest.py. All right, and I'm just going to write some code in here. So we're going to open that file. So the name of my file is called the map.txt. All right, and I'm going to store that in maybe a variable called the map file. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say the map file contents is equal to the map file dot read. Now, you could actually choose to read a little bit at a time from this guy, or you can use read to read the entire contents of the file. That's what we're going to do in here. So you can choose to say, I want to read in 10 characters from this guy. And I'll experiment with that a little bit here in a second. So then I'm going to go ahead and print out the map file contents. So notice here's our hello world, and here's our this is line 2. So this is a Python program that is getting its input from a file external to that program. You know, and I can sit there and I can type in a bunch of stuff there, save that file, go back to my file test, run this again, and now we see we have more stuff down here. So now instead of asking users for input, this program now relies on an external text file to bring strings into it, for example, okay? Now, just to show you some things we can do, so I can say I want to read in the first 10 characters from this guy, and notice I only get hello world. We almost get the D out of it. So I can choose to read only portions of what's in that file. And then if I read again, it'll pick up where it left off. But you know, if you kind of think back earlier in the semester, one of the things we've been doing quite a bit is string manipulation. So once we get something into a string format, we're pretty good at working with it. All right, so I'm a fan unless you have some gigantic file. And, you know, so one thing I might say is file IO is a super important concept, but it's a very old school concept that sometimes we don't think about. Because most modern programs, we're storing stuff in a database or something like that somewhere, and we're going to experiment with that. So we're going to try to look at the different ways we can externally store data for use by our program, kind of going through history, putting ourselves in the shoes of the early day mud developers and saying, okay, well, I need to keep information about my world and my weapons and all these different things. And I don't want to have to hard code all this stuff in syntax inside of my program. Instead, I want to, you know, build it. I want that stuff to read it in and automatically generate my my level. Because one thing we run into in the well, you know, this isn't a surprise, but you know, the people who are making our super popular video games, let's say, typically it's not the programmers that make the game a great game. The programmers make the game a working game. You have designers and you have the storytellers. Usually it's the storytellers that are actually making it the great game, right? The designers make it look good. The programmers make it work well. But the storytellers, these type of creative people, they're the ones that figure out the storyline and what kind of monsters you're going to be fighting and why you're fighting this war or whatever it is. You know, they're telling a story, and it's very likely that those folks are not programmers. They're not designers. They don't have that skill set. Right? So if you allowed them, but most of us can sit there and we can write a paper, right? You know, it doesn't matter what class you're in. Your teachers have asked you to write a paper to, you know, write a 1 or 2 or 5 page paper to do something. So there's this basic ability to, you know, write language that human beings have. And if we can give a creative type a tool that allows them to express what's in their mind onto digital paper, into a file, and then have the programmer get that into their program, there's some benefit in that, because now we've created a tool that a non-programming person can use to create worlds. All right, so for the time being, I'm just going to read everything in at once, because we like that. I'll go ahead and print this out. So just as a reminder, we have a whole bunch of lines here. Now, if I look at this, each one of these lines I pressed enter at the end of. And what that did is it put in a little invisible \n. It actually might have put in a \n/r for carriage return, but \n is usually used in most text files. All right, so what I can do then is in my program, I can say I want to, let's call this the file lines, is equal to the map file contents dot split. And I want to split it on carriage returns. So every single time the user had pressed enter, give me that as a separate line. So now I'll say the file lines, print that out, and you see we get a list of the individual lines in that file. All right, that makes some sense? All right, so one thing we can do now is we can say, okay, I want to represent my rooms inside of here. So maybe we create a little room sandwich. So maybe we create a room, and we create a slash room. Think of those as pieces of bread, all right? And everything in between here is the information associated with that particular room. We're inventing a way of representing our map, right? You know, we're not following any sort of industry standard. We're just saying, hey, I'm gonna come up with some sort of way of representing my map. If you want to define a room, well, then you say room here, and then you say slash room here. And then everything in between is your the information associated with the room. You want this to look a little bit more HTML-like. You would maybe look like an opening tag room and a closing tag room, something like that. But we're going to keep it as old school as possible, pretend like we had not been inspired by the HTML and XML world, and we're just going to create a kind of a ghetto version of our room. So now we're going to say our room has a title. And in our example here, where am I? Oh, here we are. We have the cave entrance is our first guy. It has a description. We also call this guy the cave entrance. All right, now we decided that we were going to have one more thing here, because we're going to want to give our rooms a unique identifier. And the reason for that is we need to have a way of talking about rooms in other parts of our map. And you'll see this in a second. So we're going to go ahead and name this guy. We're going to say he has an ID of R1. Okay. So we'll have R1. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to create another room. And this room, still in here, is a dark room. And we've been really creative. You see how programmers are not that creative? So we need that map creator person to create for us a really cool sounding game, and then the programmers can just read it in. The description for this room is also a dark room. And we're going to give this guy the ID of R2. So we just created this room and this room, or we represented it, right? We put it in text. This did not require a programmer to write this, correct? I could have given a creative person a little template and say, okay, whenever you want a room, you write it like this, and you make sure you name that something unique. So this is room 1, this is room 2 for our IDs. Okay. So now we're going to create a couple of exits. So from room 1 to room 2, we have an exit to the north. So we'll go back in here. So now we're going to follow our similar pattern. We're going to have an exit and a slash exit. Build our exit sandwich. All right. And I'm just putting slash in as this is, we know when an exit starts and we know when an exit ends. An exit starts whenever we have the word exit, and an exit ends whenever we have a word slash exit. We could, if we didn't want to use the slash, we could say exit end instead, and that has to match the string exit end. In fact, maybe that's even clearer to a non-technical person. So we'll say room end there, and we'll say room end here. All right, and we could even say room begin here. Room begin, a little bit more verbose, but maybe it's a little bit more explanatory. So this room begins. This is the stuff in that room. Then this room ends. This room begins. Here's the stuff in that room. Then that room ends. Here's an exit. It's going to begin. Now an exit has a direction, and then it has a destination ID, right? So that's why we put in these IDs here. So this exit here is going to have a direction to the north, and a destination ID is going to go to room 2, R2. Okay. So that's what this end does. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this exit and I'm going to put it into my room. It is this room that has this exit. Now, if we want to format this a little bit, you know, we can do something like this. Maybe it'll make it look a little cleaner. So I can indent that. I can indent that. I can indent that. And to a human eye, maybe that looks a little bit easier to read. So we have titles, descriptions, IDs, and then we have some exits that are in here. Now, all of this is going to come in as white space, and what we can do is we can, what's our name of our function? It's trim in a lot of languages. It's not trim in Python. Well, whatever it is, we can look it up. That trims white space off the beginning. So we can get rid of this so that the person writing this can keep themselves a little bit sane by describing their rooms like this. All right, so this first room has an exit leading to the north going to room 2. This second room, I'll go ahead and steal this, has a room or has an exit leading to the south going back to room 1. All right, so now I've described those 2 rooms. We go back to our map here. Here's room 1, exit to the north, going to room 2. Here's room 2, exit to the south, going to room 1. And also there's going to be an exit to the north going to room 3. Okay, but we're keeping it simple right now. We're creating a little 2-room dungeon, right? So we can go from room 1 to room 2 and go from room 2 back to room 1. Okay, so as of right now, we can say that we have identified we have described our dungeon in text. Is that fair? Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to read this in and process it. All right, so we go back to our file test here. And so I'm going to have my, I'm just going to show the file lines now. So notice here we have a list. So here's my text file. I read it in as a string, and then I split it on carriage returns. So we're saying it was important that they pressed enter at the end of each of these lines. Okay. And what I got is a list that looks like this. So I have the first element of the list is room begin. Then we have a title, description, an ID, and we have an exit begin. Direction, destination, exit end, room end. So we have this stuff separated into pieces. What is the Python trim? Of course. Why does that always happen? Strip. All right, so now what I can do is I can go across all the files in there or all the lines, and I can say strip. So if I want to say for line in the file lines, print line, this will print them one at a time. So that's the actual contents of our file, but we see it has all these spaces in it. if I say dot strip, that now takes all those beginning and ending spaces off. All right, just so we make sure we're dealing with just so we make sure we're dealing with the actual strings and not having to look at not trying to match exit begin, but having to match against 12 spaces followed by exit begin. We can just ask the question about the thing we're dealing with. All right, so we want to process this line. So we're going to go ahead and inside here, we'll say line is equal to line dot strip. So now we have the line that is stripped, so we don't have any spaces. So when we want to ask some questions, we want to ask if and actually we're probably going to, I want to know I want to write an object to process this guy, just to keep it in our object-oriented world. So what I want to do, and I'm going to describe this on paper first. Okay, so we're going to have map reading process. So we're going to have a map builder. Actually, it's called map reader because that's what it is. So this reads in from a text file the map and builds the equivalent components. So actually, I think I like map builder better. All right, so reads in from a text file the map and builds the equivalent components. All right, so inside of this guy, we need to build several different kinds of things. If we look back over here in our map, this whole thing here is a map. Now, we could evolve this and start having a map that links to other maps if we want to think about a really big world, but we want to keep things nice and simple right now, where we have one single map that's made up of rooms and exits. All right, so I have two different major entities inside of my map. I have rooms and I have exits. So this guy needs to be able to build a room, and he also needs to be able to build an exit. What does building a room do? It looks for I'll put it in a string, room begin. Then it looks for title. And it looks for description. And then it looks for room end. Now we're going to say, so it expects a title. It expects a description. So in fact, I'm going to change that to expects. Title. Expects a description. Now, does a room have to have an exit? It'd be a boring room, and so we would question how you got in there. But we could have in our little world here, nothing is preventing us from having a trap, right? Nothing prevents us from having an exit in room 1 that leads to room 2, but you actually can't get back. So once you get dumped into room 2, there's no exits in room 2, and now you're trapped. Maybe you put a puzzle in there or something like that.
I have learned from many Mario Maker levels, never put a soft lock.
I had a student do that to me last year. They created a Mario Maker. I guess there's these levels meant to torment people.
Really?
And so they created a level, and he didn't test it very well. So there were some places where you're like, it was impossible. You would get stuck and you couldn't get out. So I've been in this misery before. All right. But in any case, this room doesn't have to have exits. As we've designed our map, we've decided there probably is an exit. But if we kind of think about this from a game perspective, maybe you get into this room and you can go from room 2 to room 1 and from room 1 to room 2. But in order to get to room 3, you need to perform some task inside of room 2 to make the exit appear. So maybe initially it doesn't have an exit. Whatever, something like that. So we're going to say, at least in our design mentality here, that we're going to say, look for exits. All right. So a room might have one or more exits in it. Okay. So that's what the process of building a room is. Now, building an exit is going to look for exit begin. Then it's going to expect was it direction? I think that's what we put in there. Yep, direction and then destination ID. And oh, we forgot for our room, this guy expects an ID. The ID for the room, that's something new for us. Okay, so for an exit, we're looking for exit begin, expect direction, expects destination ID. Now, anything else an exit has in it? Nope. So this is going to look for, or we could say expects exit end. Expects room end. So if we found a room begin, we're going to expect a room end. Every room begin should have a corresponding room end. Every exit begin should have a corresponding exit end. And inside we have some required information, direction and destination, and that's all we're allowing in exits right now. Similarly, a room is going to have it's going to require a title, a description, and an ID. We're going to say that that ID has to be unique, but we're not going to test for that right now. We're just going to rely on that human to make sure they don't name two rooms or give IDs to two rooms that are the same. Because then we'd have a broken map file. Okay? So we want to think about processing this room. And ultimately, our homework for next class is going to be to process a map file into a collection of rooms. But we're going to walk through this at the high level right now because nothing about this is stuff we haven't done. We've done string manipulation. We've done creating rooms. We've done creating exits. But we want to think about how this is actually going to process through. So what I'm going to do here, so we're in our map. We found room begin. Or actually, if we want, we can look at our text here. So we found room begin. So now we're going to expect. So once we found room begin, we're going to, and I'm going to start a class up here. We're going to say class map builder. And this guy is going to have a constructor that's going to take in a file name. And I'm going to steal all this code here. the map file, we're going to open whatever file name we were given. Then we're going to read in the contents, and then we'll get the parts of that, that guy. I'll leave that out for right now. All right, so these are the parts for our map. Now, as I go through, let's look at our map here. As I go through this first room, so let's pretend like we're our map builder going through this first room. I see room begin. So now I'm going to read in the next line. This guy is going to be, now we're not dictating that these have to be in a specific order. We can force that. We can force that they have to give us the title, then the description, then the ID. That's fine. That, you know, if you want to do that for your assignment, that's okay. But really what I'm thinking we do is we're going through this and we're saying, I'm going to read in the next line. Now, this next line can either be an exit begin, or it could be a room end, or it's something that is split on a colon. All right, so I have 3 different animals that I could be reading in. I could be reading in the string that's exit begin. I could be reading in the string that's room end. I'm done building this room. Or I could be reading in a pair. Something that has a name and something that has a value. All right. And maybe for us right now, why don't we keep it simple and say it has to be in this order? I think that's fair enough. That'll make life a little easier. All right. So after we're in room begin, the very next thing we're going to read in is the title. So we'll grab the title. Then we're going to read in the description. We'll grab the description. Then we're going to read in the ID. We grab the ID. Okay. Now, this is all the information we need to build a room object. Is that correct? That's all we need to build a room object. Because room objects take in a title and take in a description. If I go back here and we look at our room, this guy takes in a title and he takes in a description. We're going to have it take in one additional thing now. It's going to take in the ID for this room, so a room can uniquely identify itself among all other rooms. Okay? All right, so we're going to read in the 3 pieces of information we need now. We're going to split them on the colon. So let's start writing that piece. All right, so now we're going to read in the parts for this guy. So for a room, well, we're going to start reading. So we're going to read in a line. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pass this around. All right, so I'm going to write a couple extra abilities in here. We already represented that. So we have a map builder, which reads some stuff in from a file, and now we know how to build rooms, and we know how to build exits. All right. Now we know that the very first line in a map file is going to be build a room. All right. So now what I'm going to do, I got to go back to this guy, is I'm going to remember at my map builder level, I'm going to say self.current line number. And we're going to start this guy off at 0. All right, because as I pass things around inside of Map Builder, I want to remember what room what level we're currently at. Similarly, my file lines, I want this to belong to this class. I want to be able to access my file lines and the current line number I'm working on from anywhere inside the class called Map Builder. So I'm going to make them instance fields of my Map Builder. The map file, that's a local thing. The map file contents, I read that in, that's a local string. Then I split it on carriage returns. This is the guy I want to be able to access later. He's my processed version of that file. Okay, so I have my individual lines. It still has the spaces on it, so I'll have to remember to strip those extra spaces out, but we're going to call this good enough. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and we're going to ultimately have a collection of rooms and a collection of exits in our map. So we're going to have a self dot collection of rooms, and this will start off as the empty list. I currently have no rooms. And then we'll have self dot collection of exits. Also the empty list. I currently have found no exits. The job of the map builder is to read through this text document and build up rooms and build up exits. Okay? So let's pause there for a second. We're going to say define build room. All right, so now we have a function called build room. And whenever we call build room, what's build room going to do? It's going to start looking at the current line number. So it's going to start at current line number, and it's going to get that, it's going to expect the build, what is it, room begin? It's going to expect room begin is the very first thing it'll read in at that line number. So this is line 0 in my list of lines for my file. And I'm going to expect room begin. So I'll go ahead and I could read it in and prove that I got that. So I can go ahead and say print self dot the file lines at bucket self dot current line number, and that should show me room begin. And then I'll say current line number plus equals 1. That should move me down 1, and now I'm looking at this. So now I'm going to read in the title. So we'll say title is equal to we'll start at that. That's going to be the unsplit title. And then we'll add 1. Then we'll get the description. Add 1. Then we'll get the ID. And add 1. So we got the title, we got the description, we got the ID. I haven't processed these yet. I haven't split them and turned them into objects. That's going to be your job. Okay, but I've read in these 3 lines. Now I might find some exits. Okay, so now what I'm interested in is I want to keep looking in here until I read something in that is equal to room end. So if I don't see room end here, if I read in the next line and it's not equal to room end, then I want to build exits. I know it must be an exit. So we're going to say while the next line is not equal to room end. Okay, so while I'm not looking at room end, what do I want to do? I want to build an exit. So we're going to call build exit. And now we got to go write that guy. Build exit. Now notice this is all inside of our map builder class, and the map builder class knows where it currently is in that list of lines. We're keeping track of that in the current line number variable. So as we're bouncing around between build room and build exit and things like that, we know where we are because we're keeping track of our lines. So if I'm in build exit, I know that the line I'm currently at, whatever that line number is going to be exit begin. That's what I'm going to see there. So I'll go ahead and print out, I should see exit begin. And then I'll increment my line. Then I'm going to read in my direction. And then I'm going to read in my destination ID. All right. Now I know that the very next thing I'm going to get after direction and destination ID will be my exit end. So I can go ahead and just prove that by printing it. I'm just giving you the high level stuff so you know that this stuff is going through in the right way. So notice we call build exit from in this while loop. This while loop says I'm going to keep building exits until I finally hit a room end. So if I'm not at room end, what am I at? I must be at an exit. What do? I grab exit begin, I get the parts, I grab exit end, increment by 1, then we return back to this while loop, spin back up, and now we're looking at, is the next line room end? Because I've been updating current line number in here over and over and over again. All right, so it'll keep going, keep going, keep going, and as soon as this while loop is done, I know that I am at the end of this room. So I can say print steal that line. Oh. I'm printing it out just to give us that output, letting us know we're at the end of the room. Okay, so I'm at the end of that room, and then I'll add 1. Because once I ended a room, I now am at the next room. All right, now to keep things simple, I'm going to take spaces out of here. That way we don't have to deal with an empty space, so everything has or empty lines. Okay, so this guy, after I finish a room, then what am I doing next? Well, I'm going to be at room begin. And how long do I want to do this for? I want to do this until I run out of lines. I know that what I've described so far takes me on the entire voyage between room begin and room end. And I want to keep going as long as I still have more lines to look at. So we're going to do all of this stuff. So this is what build room does. So inside of here, we can go ahead and call build room. And how many times are we calling build room? We're going to say while self dot current line number is less than the length of self dot the file lines. So as long as my current line number is a legal line on my file lines, I'm going to build a room. Building a room, we'll grab the parts of the room, grab the exits, finish that, spin back up, I'll grab the next room, so on and so forth. So now with my map builder, I should be able to down here say I want a map builder is equal to, well, here we'll call it the map is equal to map builder, and I'm going to pass it the name of the file, the map.txt. Build room not defined. Oh, I'll look at it here in a second. I probably just have a stupid bug in there because we're out of time. All right, so I'll make sure I give you the code that will process through it this way. So your homework is to go through and modify what I've given you here to actually build room objects and build exits. Okay? Now I'm going to give you a hint. The hint is this. I'll show it to you from in here. Notice that this exit right here relies on there being a room called room 2. I have not gotten room 2 yet until I've gotten down here. So what you need to do is for exits, you're going to have to find a way to not process them yet, because we're only going to want to process exits once we already have all the rooms read in, because we might have an exit leading from one room to another that doesn't have that room ID yet. All right. So I'll put the assignment up. I'll give you the starter code. And so for Thursday, we should have a map with rooms and exits just for these 2 rooms initially, but that'll work for any map size if we make the map larger. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, I will see everybody on, what day is today? Wednesday, Friday. And I'll actually leave the recording going here while I just debug this real quick in case you want to look at what the issue was later. Oh, it's called self.buildRoom. And this is called self.buildExit. Index out of range. So where am I walking past the end of it? All right, so that's getting, I'm not adding one up here, right? Nope, I'm starting at line 1. That's the file lines. Just make sure I'm getting the file lines correctly here. Room begin, room end. Oh, I know the problem. The problem is at the end of my last room, I am incrementing. Well, no, actually that should be okay. When I get to my last room, I should be at the line that says room end. So I'm going to print that. And we are printing that. That's that last room end. I'm adding 1 to it. That spins back out here. I spin back up. Current line number less than the length of self file lines. So is it trying to go in one last time? Let me just do a -1 there. It's not what it should be, but yeah, that fixes it. Okay, so why is it not equal to, when I read in that last room, do I have an extra? Oh, I bet you I have an extra carriage return at the end. Yep, there we go. I was kicking it down one more line, so technically I wasn't past the end of it. And since I wasn't technically past the end of it, it was expecting me to have a whole nother room to process, and it couldn't process anything. So now I should have working stuff less than the length of that guy. And there we go. So notice it says room begin, and it goes through all these things, then room end. So this is the full processing of those. But remember, inside of here, I'm reading in the title and the description and the room ID, so on and so forth. All right, I'll put this code up on Slack, and I'll put the assignment up.